Hey friends, Donovan Bankhead here with Ernie Williamson Music and Trumpet Thoughts, and wanted to kind of do a couple of posts. I was just giving you an update on like how I'm doing with TC on a previous video, and that triggered a couple of ideas for some other posts. And so let's do. So this is the first one of those, and the first one is this thing I've been thinking about in terms of mouthpiece diameters. And so this is just this is something I'm thinking about. So share with me your thoughts. I'm not here to like proselytize or tell you this is the truth. I'm just like thinking through this. And this may even be common knowledge, but I'm like total trumpet geek and I've not really heard people talk about this much. But as we are thinking about mouthpieces, so this video will be about mouthpieces. You know, there's a lot of confusion about what mouthpieces do, how to pick a mouthpiece, all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of thought about like, you know, well, like how do you pick the right size mouthpiece? And specifically the diameter of the mouthpiece. And you'll have some people that will say, well, you should play the largest diameter mouthpiece that you can get away with. And other people say, oh, you should play the smallest diameter mouthpiece you can get away with. And you'll have still other people say, well, your mouthpiece diameter is really just a function on your lip size. So depending on you know, the size of your lips, just like shoes, your mouthpiece should fit as well. And all that stuff kind of sounds good on surface, but like none of it holds up to any amount of like investigation, right? So if you look around at other like high caliber pro players across all spectrums of playing, they don't all follow that advice, right? There's guys that have like very large lips that don't play huge mouthpieces, and there's folks that have very thin lips that don't play small mouthpieces. So that doesn't really make sense. So like what is the determination of the diameter and the cup? Let's start with the easy one first, the cup depth. In my opinion, cup depth, you should choose the depth of cup based on the tone you want. Okay? If you want a richer, lusher, deeper sound, you should pick a deeper cup. And when we say deeper, let's say a C cup is going to be our middle of the road cup, okay? So if you want a sound that's full, has lower overtones and some upper overtones, then a C cup is a good way to start. If you'd like to have fewer upper overtones and more lower fundamental overtones and be darker sounding, than going to a B cup or a deeper cup. And again, I'm using terminology like that Bach would use. And for this analogy, we're going to pretend that the Bach mouthpiece nomenclature makes sense, which, spoiler alert, makes zero sense at all. But that's not the point of this video. But we'll just pretend that it makes sense. So in Bach parlance, the lower the letter, the deeper the cup. So an A cup is like, you know, one of their deepest cups, and an F cup would be the shallowest cup that they make. So if you want to sound with more upper overtones in it, then you would go to a shallower cup, like a D cup or an E cup, something like that. Does that make sense? If we were using Schilke parlance, Schilke is more logical in my opinion, and switches it around. So they use an A cup would be a shallow cup, C is the standard, and then D and E's would be even deeper still. Regardless, though, our cup depth is the depth is how we're changing the sound. So if we want a lush, rich sound, we're using a deeper cup. If we want a sound that's more cutting and piercing with higher overtones, then we use a shallower cup. So then what about diameter? So to be clear, with Bach parlance, the lower the number, the wider the diameter, the higher the number, the smaller the diameter. What does the diameter matter? Okay, here's where my thought comes in that I think might be somewhat unique. My whole family, my wife and my two sons all play brass instruments, and they're all low brass players. Wife and oldest kid are trombone players. The youngest son's a tuba player. And it got me thinking the other day about the difference between the trumpet and trombone and tuba mouthpieces. So the trombone, you may not know this, but a trombone is pitched an octave below the trumpet. Okay. So it's one octave below the trumpet, and the tuba is an octave below that. So it got me thinking like, well, and if you put a trumpet mouthpiece and a trombone, you're gonna be playing in the register of a trumpet, not the register of a trombone. And so you'll be all up in those upper harmonics, you know, all the notes are gonna be, you know, half steps apart from each other. So it got me thinking, well, the diameter is an important part of that, because if you've ever looked at trombone mouthpieces, they are wider across. And when I'm talking diameter, we're really talking the inner diameter from inside rim to inside rim. The outside rim doesn't really matter as much for this topic. But they are wider across than a trumpet mouthpiece. Why? That got me thinking, that has to be important. And then if you look at a tuba mouthpiece, it's wider still. Roughly 30-ish% or so wider than each one is. So it seemed to me like, well, as we go down an octave, then we're kind of going larger in diameter. Like that, we have to have that. We can have different cup depths and stuff like that, but we have to have that diameter. And as we go larger in diameter, we are getting more lip into the mouthpiece. And that got me thinking something that I've been thinking for a super long time, which is about guitar strings. A guitar string, if we think about it, has different thicknesses of strings, and you can play many of the same pitches using other strings. And as we use a G on the thinnest string has a brilliance to it. That same G in the same register on a thicker string has warmth to it, a little darker sound to it. So we're getting more fundamental as we get more of that thicker, bigger string. And with our chops, as we go with a bigger mouthpiece, where it's like we're getting more lips in there, more of our lip in there, more of the vibrating surface in there, which is emphasizing more of that fundamental. Ergo, if you want to have a sound that has lots of that lower fundamental and that is trends on the darker side, and where as you go into the upper register, the tones are starting to sound more like wolf tones would on a cello or a violin, where they start to get a little more hollow and light. A wider diameter mouthpiece is a great choice for that, because it's going to emphasize those things, and it's like playing in the upper register on a guitar or bass guitar or something like that on the low strings. But conversely, if you want to play in the upper register and you want a sound that's more piercing and punching and has core to it, doesn't have that hollowness to it, but it's like kind of has that punch to it, you will find that's better with a smaller diameter mouthpiece. And I've noticed for myself, based on the tessitura and the tone that I've intend to play or need to play, that switching diameter of mouthpieces has been really helpful. This kind of flies against a lot of conventional wisdom that we've been taught, or that I've even thought for decades. Because I think the conventional wisdom is find a rim size that you like and then just change the cup. And if that works for you and you like it, of course you can still do that. But we have to recognize that it may be giving us sounds that aren't the right sounds or characteristic sounds in certain cases. So, case in point, let's just for the sake of this argument, let's say that you are a commercial player. And by commercial player, I mean you could be playing in a quintet, you could be playing in a pit, you could be playing in an orchestra, you could be playing any number, you could play in a dance band, any number of things based on what the gig is. And you need to have the right appropriate sound for each one. If you keep the same rim and just change the cup, you will not be able to get the right sounds for all those things. You will not be able to sound like an orchestral player if you're using, a Bach 15 mouthpiece. Even if it's a 15C, it's not going to sound the right way. Conversely, if you're trying to play lead trumpet in a big band and you're doing it on a Bach, 1 or 1.5C or something, you're just not going to have the right sound. Now, I know some of you are going to say, well, I know someone that does everything on a Bach 3C and they can play lead and they play everything on that. Sure, someone can do it, but most people can't. And also, a lot of times when you hear about the one player doing it all on one mouthpiece, it's often on something like a Bach 3C. And let me tell you something really interesting about a Bach 3C. It's not really a 3C. It has the same internal volume as a 7C. A Bach 3C, really, if you were using logic in the system, is actually a 3D, so it's a little bit shallower cup. So that's why. That's why if you hear someone using one mouth to do everything, it's always a 3C. It's always the one that does it. So I figured this out because I had a gig where I was having to switch between my B flat and piccolo. And I just gotten this mouthpiece in, and one of the things about using TCE is I've been able to play incredibly small diameter mouthpieces that I could never play before. And I had this mouthpiece, the smallest mouthpiece I've ever played. And I was trying to play it on B flat, and I found like, man, I can play in the upper register on this, but when I have to get at the bottom of the staff and below the staff, it wasn't reliable. I had a hard time getting it to speak softly and reliably without any air biscuits. And so I couldn't trust it. So I switched over to my normal mouthpiece. It was a little bigger, but then I had to like switch to piccolo. And then it got me thinking like, wait a minute. I wonder if this very small mouthpiece diameter would work on a piccolo. It had a C cup, but it was a very small diameter. Put it in the piccolo, sounded wonderful. Best piccolo sound I've ever had. Because you think about piccolo, our low C is the C in the staff, and then our middle C, our tuning, the quote unquote tuning C, is the C above the staff on B flat trumpet parlance. And so that small diameter mouthpiece for piccolo, that super small diameter, made perfect sense because all the playing you're doing is essentially, if you equated the piccolo trumpet playing to B flat, all the playing you're doing is from this C, from that C up. Everything's there with maybe the occasional like F. You're like, the lowest you're getting is that F really for most of our literature. And most everything else is above the staff if we were to play it equivalently on this instrument, right? So that small diameter mouthpiece, which for me, I was using something that would have been more like probably about a Bach 20. Like it was that small. Was perfect for that. It was amazing for that. Put the same mouthpiece on a B flat. It was fine in the upper register, but then as I started to get to the bottom, it would start to be difficult. So I want you to think about that. Maybe give a try with that. Think about your mouthpiece diameter. Picking that based off the type of sound and specifically what register you're going to be playing in. Are you going to be playing mostly above the staff? Then I want you to try using a smaller diameter and maybe also a smaller cup if you need that brighter, sizzly sound. Are you going to be mostly playing in the staff and you're playing like etudes and stuff like that? Then maybe a wider diameter might sound better and give you a lusher, richer, fuller sound. But try messing with the diameter and see if that works for you instead of only messing with the cup. That diameter and cup together might be the secret. Check it out. Let me know what you think.